Good morning, Gideon. We are on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph 113a. We're about maybe a quarter from the bottom of the page. The line begins with the word Ma'os Ra'os Ninhu, and the fourth word is a little Gimel. It says Gimel Dvarim Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara now is going to give us from one,
chapter 3.
Sorry?
Chapter 3 of Devarim?
No. Dvarim here means things. There's Gimel Dvarim, three things.
Oh, good thing.
Yeah. So the Gemara is not going to go from like one item to the next, telling us pieces of advice from various different sources, as well as other statements that are tangentially related. As we'll see, some of them we actually learned in previous Gemaras. Okay, so let's begin. Gimel Dvarim, there are three things that Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Mishum Anshe Yerushalayim, quoting from the men of Jerusalem. Right? Rabbi Yochanan is from that first generation of sages of the Gemara, first generation of Amoraim, who himself moved from Jerusalem, or at least from Eretz Yisrael, from the Holy Land, to Babylonia. So he brings with him some insight and teachings from the land of Israel. So he tells us he heard three pieces of advice from the men of Jerusalem. Three things. Number one, when you're going to war, don't be the first one to battle. Be at the back of the line. So that you can run back first. It's sound advice if you want to stay alive in war, to stay at the back of the line and run back when things go sour. You're first to run back, so you're saved. It doesn't seem very courageous, though. Usually when we talk about the courage of the men in the battle, we talk about the guys at the front of the line. So perhaps so number one, if you're not so maybe specifically speaking about the men of Jerusalem, who are city folk and not as skilled at battle, and therefore would kind of be a waste of their talent. Or they would be better. The front line would be better served by others. I don't know, making that up. Or perhaps, given the time period we're talking about the Roman occupation of Eretz Yisrael, and this is the time when, after decades and decades of attempts at rebellion and then fighting, sometimes the Jews doing better, and then finally the Jews being really just decimated, hundreds of thousands of Jews being killed, which eventually leads to like almost all Jews going to Babylonia, and the center of gravity in terms of power and Torah learning shifts from Israel to Babylonia. So considering this time period, and considering the fact that many of the sages actually were not in favor of these battles. Rabbi Akiva joined Bar Kokhba, had full faith and hope in Bar Kokhba in his success, but many sages did not. And if you go farther back, especially since Rabbi Yochanan is bringing this news from the men of Jerusalem, the people of Jerusalem who went through multiple sieges, sometimes infighting amongst Jews themselves, if you're going back a couple of decades earlier, infighting within the Jewish people that led to a lot of this destruction. Well, not that far back, but the sages versus the Sadducees versus the rebels, right? We learned about this. You learned about this in Tractate Gittin, with the rebels in Jerusalem when they were laid siege. They wanted to compel the Jews to fight, so they burned down the storehouses to force the Jews to fight the Romans. This is while the temple still stood. So it's about 60, 70 years prior to Rabbi Yochanan speaking. But perhaps with that memory of these kind of wasted battles that they were compelled to get into because they had no choice, sometimes the sages actually wanted to avoid battle. So maybe it's in that context in which they're saying, be the last ones to go so you can run away. Right? It's hard for me to believe that we're talking about a Melchemes mitzvah, a battle that's required by Torah to go to battle that person should be cowardice in the back. We have, the verses say straight up, whoever's fearful shouldn't come to battle to begin with. So I don't think it means you're like a mechemes mitzvah. I think it's talking about in these contexts, in these rebellions, these failed rebellions, that the sages knew would be failures in many instances. In these cases, look, you said the reality is you can't avoid going to battle. The battle is happening, so you have to go, but stay at the back of the line. That's how I assume this is to be understood.
Feudal wars.
Yeah. It's hard for me to believe that Rabbi Yochanan, the men of Jerusalem meant mechemes mitzvah, in which there's like a mitzvah to go to battle. I mean, all the scriptures filled with leaders and warriors and heroes who stood at the front of the line. But those were all battles that were encouraged by the prophets, by the sages, knowing that they had God's full backing. But in the years that led to the destruction of the temple and to the time that Rabbi Yochanan has to leave Jerusalem, Eretz Yisrael, not Jerusalem, they've been gone for decades already, but leave Israel to go to Babylonia with the fresh memory of these failed battles that many times they knew would be failures before they started. It's perhaps in this context in which the statement is being said. Maybe. Okay, that was statement number 1 from the men of Jerusalem. Statement number 2 of the 3. Asay Shabbat chachol, turn your Shabbos into mundane, don't indulge. Your Shabbos meal should be ordinary. Val tetzarech lebrius, rather than be required to ask for a handout from others, right? We had this from Rabbi Akiva earlier, where Rabbi Akiva said that if a person only has enough funds to give himself a plain weekday ordinary meal for Shabbos, then do that rather than, God forbid, ask for a handout. So this comes from the men of Jerusalem. That was advice number 2. Advice number 3, get involved in business with someone who the hour shines upon him. So you see someone is graced by Hashem, his business is doing well, see if you can get into business with him. I think we had this from Rabbi Akiva as well earlier.
No, we had remember?
I think it was Rabbi Akiva who gave this advice as well. Right? We certainly had this advice as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are the 3 statements that Rabbi Yochanan brings to us from the men of Jerusalem. Some more statements from the men of Jerusalem, this time coming through another sage. Okay, so skip the parentheses. Shloisha Dvarim, 3 things. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua, son of Levi, told us 3 things. Mishum Anshe Yerushalayim, quoting from the men of Jerusalem. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is again from the same generation of Rabbi Yochanan, the generation of the first generation of Amoraim, the Gemara sages, post-Mishnaic text, post-Mishnaic era, who are part of that generation that moves en masse from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia. So he brings with us, again, 3 statements from the men of Jerusalem. Number 1. Al tarbe bignus. One should not be acquainted to, gnus literally means shameful activity. I see a slight distinction between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam here. Essentially, what it's talking about is not to publicly engage in such activities that would attract negative attention. Why is that? Mishum Maisha Shahaya, because of the story that happened. This story we're referring to, as Rashi and Rashbam both tell us, is referring to the story of David and Bathsheba. King David, who sees Bathsheba, she's bathing on the roof. So there's nothing wrong with bathing. What's wrong with bathing? Bathing is a good thing. Everybody should bathe. But don't do it on the roof in the public. Don't do it in an open area. It'll attract attention, and not the kind you want. So that's teaching number 1. Everybody has to shower, but do so in private. So it's kind of like the Gemara says in Ksubis. Everybody knows what the bride and groom are doing. There's only a certain kind of person who has to say it. Everybody knows, but you don't have to say it. Right? Just because it exists and something that we all have to do, it doesn't mean it should be spoken about public. There's a certain sense of shame has become a bad word, but a certain sense of modesty that there's something healthy about feeling embarrassed about these kinds of things, even though everybody does it. It's a healthy thing to it. Like the title of Rabbi Manas Friedman's book, "Why Doesn't Anybody Blush Anymore?" It's a good title. I haven't read the whole book. Maybe I did years ago. I don't know, but the title itself is a good title in the sense that there's something healthy about blushing. Everybody knows what we're doing. It doesn't matter. There still should be a sense of privacy to it. And that's kind of the message here. Bathsheba's showering. Good, everybody showers. But don't do it on the roof of your house.
Chutzpah would be when you want to know when and where.
Sorry?
Chutzpah would be when you want to know when and where.
Exactly. It's a chutzpah. It's the exact opposite. That's exactly right.
Reminds me of during Yom Kippur service, when the Kohen Gadol into the mikveh, his subordinates
Stand there to block him when he's getting dried up,
hold up a towel.
so nobody should see.
It's not the same exactly.
Yeah. 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 Yep. Okay, that was statement number one, or teaching number one from the men of Jerusalem, brought to us by Rabbi Shubin Levi. Statement number two, Bitra Bagra, if your daughter has come of age to get married, then get her married as soon as possible. And if need be, Shechrer Avdacha, free your slave. You own a slave, free him. So he's a free man, V'tenla, and let him marry her, rather than letting her be alone. A single girl alone, not a good thing. Right? For obvious reasons. And this is a theme that's going to come up soon. But being single and alone is not a very good and healthy thing for a young woman, for a young man as well, as we'll see soon. And therefore, get her married early. And if need be, free your slave. And allow him to marry her if that's what you have to do. That was statement number two. Just on that subject of getting married early, I'm a big proponent of it. And for a very simple reason. There's this false notion that comes from the broader, more secular world, I suppose, that a guy or a girl first has to get their life figured out. And once they have their life figured out, then they'll get married. Very bad idea, because two people have their lives figured out, inevitably will have conflict in the life they figured out. And then they have to figure out how to compromise on each of the lives they already pre-figured out for each other. Very complicated. Much better off actually having no life figured out. And then the two of you together figure it out. So long as the two of them share a goal, they share values, they both want to build a Jewish family together. They both want to live a life built on the principles of Torah and mitzvahs. Right? So you share these basic values, and then together you work toward that goal. Then you're creating your life together, and you're creating the goal together, and you can live together as a singular unit. But if each of them already have their values and life goals figured out, then they're on the track to get their life goals done. And she has her life goals figured out, and she's on the track to get them done. Now go try to compromise her life goals for some her life goal. It makes it very difficult. So one's much better off, and it's a healthier version of marriage if the two can get married younger, where they're both mature enough to think about the values and goals that they share in life, and then they can build that life together rather than have their own life and try to compromise for each other. Compromise in marriage causes resentment. Not a good idea. You want to build them together, right? You don't want to be comparing notes of who gave up more for the marriage. Not a good idea. We're in this together. We both have a shared goal. We both have a shared vision. We have a shared values, and we're building a life together. And that's, I think, maybe extrapolating a little more from the men of Jerusalem here, but the statement that they're saying here is that your daughter has come of age, get her married right away. If you need to free your slave to let her marry your slave, do so.
It's amazing you said that.
Yeah.
Because the leader of our running pack, Wolf,
Mm-hmm.
he was from the concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
and his wife too, I think.
Mhm.
And he said, you don't look for love when you're looking to get married. He says, you're looking for a partner. He says, you get married and then you fall in love.
That's right.
And I'm sure that's what happened in those days.
100%. If you have a shared common goal and you both have the maturity to put that goal for front and center,
Right.
marriage can work. Okay. Advice number 3 from the Man of Jerusalem, coming to us from Rabbi Levi. Have a zohir be'ishtecha mechasana harishain. Be wary of your wife and your first son-in-law. What does that mean? Why should you be worried about your wife and your first son-in-law? My time out. What's the reason for that? So now we're done with the Men of Jerusalem because we're stopping to speak Hebrew, and now we're starting to speak Aramaic. So this is generation or 2 or 3 later. The sages of the Gemara are analyzing the statement that they have from Rabbi Levi, who brought it from the Men of Jerusalem back in Israel, which you go back to the Tanaic era. So now we're speaking in Babylonian. My time, what's the reason for the statement? Why should one be worried about his wife and his oldest son-in-law? So 2 possible solutions. Rav Chizda Amar Mishum Ever. Rav Chizda says, literally because of illicit relationship that might ensue. Right? The mother is very proud of her first son-in-law, or her first daughter's married. This is like their life. Once you already have one child married, every child getting married is exciting. But certainly the first one is very exciting. Yeah, for son-in-law, we're so proud of him. Look at his family, look how nice he is, look how good he is, and God forbid, as the kids like to say, it might lead to mixed dancing. I'm being a little joking, but this is what the Gemara says. There's a concern of an illicit relationship. That was Rav Chizda's suggestion as to why the Men of Jerusalem are telling you to be wary of your wife and your first son-in-law. Rav Kana suggests, by the way, not Rav Kana, sorry. We met Rav Chizda and Rav Kana earlier. Rav Chizda was the brewery guy who said that the guy who's the rabbi who had a brewery, who said that a brewery is a blessing because you can give lots of tzedakah. And Rav Kana was the Payan who Rav told him to have a job cutting meat in the market rather than saying it's below his dignity. We met them both earlier on this page. So Rav Kana says, what's the meaning of this? Not to be careful of your wife's relationship with your first son-in-law. Rav Kana says, Mishum Mamain, because of money. She's so excited about him. She's constantly buying gifts for him. Whatever you need, I'll get for you, because she's so excited and proud of her new son-in-law, her first son-in-law. So be wary. Your wife's going to empty your pockets on the first son-in-law, giving him gifts and stuff. So the Gemara therefore concludes, Havaha Isnu, both are true. There are some times in which the problem is it might lead to an illicit relationship, and sometimes the problem is it might lead to her spending all your money on him. So in any event, be careful of your wife and your first son-in-law. Translating directly, I'll let everybody do with it as they will. Okay, so now that we're on this train of pieces of advice, statements that come from that generation, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and we're talking about the number 3, like 3 pieces of advice from the Men of Jerusalem from Rabbi Yochanan, 3 pieces of advice from the Men of Jerusalem from Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. So we're going to have more such statements in groups of 3. Well, we had earlier, Rav instructed his son Evu, Rav instructed his son Chia. We had Rav instructing some of his students. So that comes from Babylonia. Will there be more soon? I haven't read that far ahead, but the page ahead that I read ahead is all earlier. Okay, Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Shloisha, there are 3 people, Menoicheloi Olam Haba, are guaranteed to be inheritors of the world to come. So guaranteed reward for the following 3 people. Number 1, Elohim, they are the following. Hador be'eretz Yisrael, one who lives in the land of Israel. Rabbi Yochanan left Eretz Yisrael, but clearly still yearns to go back. He moved back at some point? Could be. That was not Rabbi Yochanan. That was Rabbi Zeda. That was Rabbi Zeda, who went through fast to forget his Babylonian Talmud to get Jewish. Right. So Hadar Be'eretz Yisrael, one who lives in Israel, guaranteed in the world to come. Jews who are sometimes critical of more secular society in the land of Israel should remember this. They live in Israel. By the Gemara's ruling, they are guaranteed a share in the world to come. No qualifiers. Especially considering throughout all of our history, almost all of our history, certainly our history post-destruction, Second Temple, it was challenging to live in Eretz Yisrael. This is true till this very day. And living there on a day in, day out basis is a continuous connection to the neshama. I live here because I'm Jewish, and this is the Jewish land. Whatever language they pouch it in, whatever secularized version of nationalism and Zionism, whatever they want to claim. At the end core, a Jew is there because he's a Jewish neshama and he's living in Eretz Yisrael. It's a daily connection to his neshama. That's right. So this is number one, guaranteed place in the world to come. Number two, a magadol banav l'talmud Torah, one who raises his sons in the study of Torah. Guaranteed place in the world to come, because he raised children who are committed, right? So you have like identity levels here, right? So the first level identity is a person lives in Eretz Yisrael. His identity is I'm a Jew living in Israel, right? And then number two is I raise children whose identity is the study of Torah, even if not in Israel. But if they are children who are engaged in the study of Torah, then again they have that continuous connection to Hashem. They are studying Torah. Number three, hamavdala yayin b'motzei Shabbosis, one who makes havdalah on wine on Saturday night. This is an interesting little factor here, which is the halacha makes note of this elsewhere, and so does the Gemara, that wine was expensive. And many, because it's too expensive, maybe they would have made kiddush on wine, but they, as he says here, they would make kiddush on wine, but not necessarily would they have made havdalah on wine. They would have just made havdalah in Ma'ariv, right? In the evening, in the Ma'ariv on Motzei Shabbos, we add a paragraph in Atochan Antanu, right? The paragraph Atochan Antanu in Atochan Lamdas in that fourth bracha of Shemona Esrei, which is essentially a havdalah. So, one might have said, "Look, I did havdalah anyway. It's too expensive to have wine." But one who decides to keep wine from Motzei Shabbos, which means his dedication to Hashem and mitzvahs is even when it hurts his pocket, he's a guarantee in the world to come. As the Gemara says it, Mahi, what's the meaning of this making Havdalah Motzei Shabbos? The Mishayir Mikidusha Lavdalta. He leaves behind wine from his Kiddush for Havdalah. Even though he has very little, he only has 1 cup of wine, he still leaves behind so he can make Havdalah. Right? We learned about this before, about turning your wine not pogum, for the person who only has so little wine and wants to save for Motzei Shabbos. This is what we're talking about. So this person, in other words, the person who's dedicated to performing Hashem's mitzvahs in the best possible way, even when it hurts his own pockets, this is guaranteed a share in the world to come. And statement in regard to the 3 who are guaranteed a share in the world to come. Yeah, what do you want to comment?
Havdalah is a rabbinic.
Well, certainly, Havdalah is rabbinic, yeah, certainly, and certainly making it on wine, definitely rabbinic too. Yeah. So the person could say, "Look, I did it in Havdalah, I'm done."
Or he could have made it on Mar Medina. Yeah.
Or maybe you could have made it on Chamar Medina. Yeah, you could have made it on beer, which would be cheaper locally, let's say. The best is wine. Yeah, so he's pushing the limits of what today it's easy, thank God, everything's cheap, but certainly the old day would have been, it could have been a very expense, but that might have been cheaper. Okay. Another statement from Rabbi Yochanan in Clump of 3. Rabbi Yochanan taught beautiful teachings here. There are 3 people who every day God announces about them, how amazing they are. God makes an announcement declaring, "Wow, I'm so proud of these 3 people." Yeah. So it's interesting. What's the difference between someone who gets to share in the world to come guaranteed versus someone who God every day is announcing on them how proud he is? Right? Well, I'll suggest in a moment why maybe. But the following are three people that every day God says, I'm proud of these people. Number one, Al Ravok, a single man, a single male, it's Ravok, Hador Bakrach, who lives in a big city, the Eino Chayten doesn't sin. He's single, he's alone, he's not married, he's got biological desires and urges like every other human on the planet, and he controls himself. That's a big deal. So God announces, I'm proud of you every day. This will lead me to suggest that the reason why Hashem announces he's proud of him every day is because this is a struggle every day. The first three who will get a share in the world to come are wonderful achievements: living in Israel, raising children of Torah, dedicated to mitzvahs even when it hurts one's pocket. But those are achievements that a person does, and that's it. This is something the person is struggling with every day. So every day Hashem announces, I'm proud of you. Because he's a single man living in a big city where there's plenty of opportunity to sin, and he doesn't.
How does he know that?
Sorry, how does God know?
Yeah, how does this guy know that God is saying?
Rabbi Yochanan, he's one of the sages. He must have heard from his teachers. He heard from his teachers, going back to I don't know how far back. But this is the sage's intuition, the sage's connection to Torah and to God that allows him to tell us these things, the power of Torah. So this is one. The first person Hashem says, I'm proud of you every day, is the person who has this ability to sin and doesn't. A single male in a big city. Number one. Number two, Val Ani, and a poor person, Hamachzir Aveda, which returns a lost object. Labala, to its owners. It's again it's a similar thing, where the urge to want to keep, right? The person is fighting his urges here, right? The urge the person has to want to keep that item because he's poor, and for the sake of honesty, returns it to the owner, even though he could have got away with it. No one would know anything. Hashem says, every day God says, I'm proud of that guy. Number three, Al-Ashir Hama'ase Peroisov Itzina, a rich man who gives his tithing discreetly. Again, this is fighting an urge. It's a basic urge. People want to be known as good people. So if I'm wealthy, I would certainly want people to know me as a philanthropist. And the one who gives his tithing in private, God says, every day I'm proud of you. End statement from Rabbi Yochanan with regard to three people that God is proud of every day. God announces his pride every day. Sorry?
To be proud of him every day. Is it every day he does that after? Is it?
All right, good question. I don't know the answer. It seems
because it seems on the lost article that's not something that occurs every day.
Right. The lost article is
okay. So the one where he's controlling his urges, yes.
Yeah.
The one where he's finding
good point.
Lost article is
not a daily occurrence. But I suppose it means that it could be more broadly speaking, the person who's poor and has to maintain his dignity every day.
His honesty.
His dignity and honesty has to maintain every day. Maybe that's what it means. And it's expressed in the fact that he's returning a lost object. Good point, though. Okay, so final comment the Gemara says now on this discussion. Quite interesting. Rav Safra, says the Gemara, Rav Safra Rava Kadar Bakrachava. Rav Safra was a single man. He was a man, obviously. He was a man, Rabbi Safra, who lived in a big city. He was single. Top of Kufyud Gimel Beis, 113b. Now, Tani Tana Kamei to Rava Rav Safra. Rava and Rav Safra were learning together, and this teaching from Rabbi Yochanan was just told to them. That God announces his pride every day on these three individuals, including the single guy who lives in a big city. So Rav Safra heard this. Sahavu Panav de Rav Safra. Rav Safra's face was shining. He was so excited because he's a single guy living in a big city, never sinning. So he's like, wow, I'm getting validated here. God announces how proud he is of me every day. So Amar le Rava. Rava, his friend, tells him, calm down. Lav kagoin mar. We're not talking about someone like you. Ella, rather, kagoin Rav Chanina v'Rav Oshia. We're talking about people like Rav Chanina and Rav Oshia. Now, what's their story? Says the Gemara. Dahavo ushkifi ba'arad Yisrael. They were cobblers, shoemakers in the land of Israel. V'havayasu b'shuka deznus, and they would sit in the market where there were professional women entertainers. V'avdilu mesani leznus, and they would make shoes for these professional entertainers. Va'ayluhu, and they would come to get their shoes by Rav Chanina and Rav Oshia. Inu mistakli bahu, they, these professional women, would look at them, Rav Chanina and Rav Oshia. The inu, but they, loy madlin einayolas look bahu, would never raise up their eyes to look at them. That's what we're talking about. Shoemakers selling shoes to professional women entertainers and never once looking at them.
And I'm sure these shoes are not
Whatever they are.
for utility purposes.
Not only for utility purposes, perhaps.
Don't be more.
And these professional women would swear as follows. By the life of the holy ones of the land of Israel. So people swear like, I swear to, and they would invoke God's name. So you want to invoke the most high and holy when a person swears. Like in some cultures they say, I swear my mother, because like it's the most sacred of things, you swear on it. So these women, how they would swear? The most sacred thing they could possibly think of is these sages of Jerusalem. They would swear by the life of those holy sages of Israel. Because they notice this. They're going to buy shoes from Rabbi Chanina and Rav Oshia, and never once are these people looking at them. Which is another beautiful thing here. So first of all, Rava tells Rav Safra, these are the kinds of people God's saying he's proud of every day. You, a single guy living in Eretz Yisrael while you're hanging around in the study hall all day, not such a big challenge. But the guy who's out there in business and behaves, now we're talking. So I don't know if he'll be happy if I repeated the story, but I think he'll be fine if I told you this. My grandfather, my father's father, was in business in textiles for many, many years. So he told me in the early years in the 80s or something, he once traveled to China for business to meet, I guess, clients or maybe suppliers, whatever he was going for in textiles. And when he got there, so, especially in the 80s, I imagine it still happens today, but certainly in the 80s, we're like, when you go from Australia to China, you might as well have gone to the moon, right? So the clients, your hosts, take care of you, put you up in a hotel, make sure you got nice food, and they would provide entertainment too. So when Mr. New comes from Australia, they tell my grandfather, oh, we heard about you. We know who you are, so don't worry, we didn't send any entertainment to you. My grandfather would say, he's like, even if I wanted to send, my reputation as a good Jew didn't let me. Right? That's a similar kind of story, similar kind of thing. A guy sitting in the study hall all day and he's behaving. Good for you, Rav Safra. But someone who's out there in the world and is engaging in the world, and when he has all kinds of opportunities and stays faithful, that's something praiseworthy. Moreover, as in this case with Rav Oshia and Rav Chanina and my grandfather's story, in saying no, you actually invoke teshuvah, some sense of inspiration by those who ordinarily are sinners. These women they are inspired, and even in their lowly state of their profession, they're inspired by these wholesome men who told them no. It's a lesson in standing proud to your principles and not engaging. You actually win the respect of those you're saying no to.
It might take it as an insult also.
No. Usually positive influence is by engaging and conversing and talking and explaining and showing. But here it's a question of saying no, by sticking to my guns and saying absolutely not crossing that line. That in and of itself brings inspiration, even by the lowest of people here. And they end up swearing by the holy people of Israel. Am Kadosh, a holy people. Yes, what do you want to say, Alan?
But some people would take that as an insult.
Saying no to a professional?
No, not looking at your customer.
Oh, they understood why. And I imagine when they showed up, they were dressed advertising their profession. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
right? So them not looking was
Yeah.
maybe initially they were insulted, but obviously they're talking to each other like, do you notice how these guys never look at us? Amazing, these religious Jews, they stick to their principles. They don't, we're right there. They're men. We know what men are into, right? And nothing. They don't look.
These are
You don't see that today.
they're street smart.
There are good Jews out there. There are good Jews out there. And look, Hashem is announcing He's proud of them every day because it's hard, because it's difficult, because it's challenging. Nonetheless, so each of these statements from the Gemara could be fabrenged on very beautiful insights, and God willing, some more of such beautiful insights coming tomorrow. And we're gonna have we're gonna introduce a concept from Tanya tomorrow. Hopefully, I think we'll get that far. And a question of obviously, sir, love your fellow Jew, and how what our attitude towards sinners should be or ought to be. We know people who are completely and totally messed up. What's our attitude toward them? We'll discuss that, God willing, tomorrow or the day after, depending how long it takes us to get through the Gemara. Yeah?
When you start to learn Hasidic, you can sort of now apply what you learn in Talmud to the Hasidic.
Right.
These men are engaging the world.
Oh, yeah, certainly are selling shoes.
Engaging the world.
That's right. That's right. That's the best kind of learning with the mystical, like the Hasidus and the Nigla, the revealed part, come together. Okay, you have a wonderful day, and God willing, some more inspirational teachings from the Gemara tomorrow.
Thank you.